It's hard to believe it, but we're already into the 10th day of the year 2024. That's right. A lot is going on in the world, even as we're in the 10th day. And all along those lines, as a matter of fact, armed gunmen took over an Ecuador TV station. So that is something that is going on in the southern part of the North America and all along that line. So definitely that, well, actually that would be South America, but definitely a lot is going on there. And actually a Southern Cal man was stranded in Ecuador. And apparently on one of the stations, he shared details of what he went through, as there is apparently what Ecuador is declaring as an internal armed conflict on gunmen and on the country and all along those lines. So definitely a lot is going on in that space. And apparently the biggest Houthi attack in the Red Sea. 50 merchant vessels face missile and drone strikes. And there are some people that are saying that the Houthis are exploiting or exposing NATO's weakness. And definitely that's even what a Italian admiral was saying might be a reality check for the U.S. But the U.S. and U.K. forces shot down Houthi missiles and drones in the Red Sea, according to the U.S. military. And definitely, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is visiting in the Middle East, and he has told Abbas that the U.S. supports tangible steps toward a Palestinian state. And that is what he told the Palestinian president over there in the West Bank. So that is something that is going on. And I guess folks are trying to find a way that they can find some peaceful solution to that particular situation as well. And of course, there's still some pushback to this notion of what the Pope was talking about with banning surrogacy and all along those lines. So, Alice Fitzgerald says surrogacy won't be banned after Pope Francis's denouncement. And definitely, as we know, apparently Pope Francis called surrogacy deplorable, but many women who became surrogates feel otherwise. And while the parents who choose it apparently find it humbling and miraculous. So definitely there might be some conflicts as to the way that people are thinking about the notion of surrogacy and all in that kind of way. And definitely, the Maldives, a lot of people would say that tourism is their lifeblood. So definitely, the Maldives travel agencies are urging Ease My Trip to resume flights and everything, because definitely there has been some controversy around that as well, because social media uproar may cost the Maldives millions, as feud with India apparently is intensifying in that area. And Modi's visit to a remote Indian archipelago rakes up a storm in the Maldives. So definitely that's something else that people are paying attention to. And like I mentioned before, Gabriel Adel became France's youngest prime minister at the age of 34. So France's new prime minister Adel to choose cabinet as Macron eyes a political reset. So definitely there might be some changes into the way that the politics are going there in France as well. So definitely a lot of things that are going on in that part of the world, and we're definitely paying attention to a number of those things, even here at Pod TV as well. So definitely a lot of folks are paying attention to a number of things that are going on in the world. And as I've mentioned before, the German strike is still going on. As a matter of fact, train drivers strike, farmers protest, and it's still going on there. And that is causing major disruptions in Germany. So we're seeing that both their rail strike and their farmers protest are causing disruption in Europe's biggest economy. So that is something else that is going on in the world. And Zelensky apparently made an unannounced visit to Lithuania to discuss the war in his part of the world as well. So definitely that is something that is going on. And Zelensky says there is no pressure to stop fighting Russia. So definitely it does look like that war could be going on for some time as well. So definitely a lot of people will be paying attention to that and paying attention to a number of other issues in the world as well. And of course, we do know that the Israeli military has carried out more strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israel and Hezbollah apparently are edging closer to war as drones hit key Israel command base as well. So definitely does look like there's a lot of conflicts going on around the world and around the whole area and everything. As a matter of fact, I just saw a story here in Durham where they had a traffic stop, and they said, and this is one of those things that was involved in international politics, but apparently they were saying that they found weapons of mass destruction on that stop and everything. So they found a bunch of weapons and they labeled them as weapons of mass destruction. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what they found. Maybe some AK-47s and some other type of weapons, but I'll have to get in touch with some of my friends in the police force to find out exactly what they found here that would be considered weapons of mass destruction and all along those lines. And of course, we do know that the Trump case for immunity is still going on, and folks will figure out whether that happened or not. And the House Republicans are considering holding Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress. And there is a Republican debate today as well. So tonight's Republican debate in Iowa would only include Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. So it looks like Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis will be debating each other in that debate in Iowa and all along those lines. And speaking of North Carolina, a North Carolina man has settled for millions after a wrongful conviction and spending 44 years in prison. So Ronnie Long is the gentleman's name, and he was put in prison for a rape charge that he didn't commit, and it looks like he got a $25 million settlement. But like I said, that is a long time to be sitting there in the prison system, apparently for a crime that you did not commit, and all along those lines. So, and speaking of North Carolina and the whole East Coast, we had a lot of storms. I know that I was hearing them here in North Carolina, and I'm sure that Nick and others that are here affiliated with this area heard them as well. And they're saying that deadly storms across the U.S. delivered tornadoes, snow, and flooding. Don't know that we got any tornadoes in Durham, but there was definitely some bad and severe weather. But today is looking sunny and lovely out there and all along those lines. So that's just some of the things that I saw in the news. I'm getting ready to bring in some of our guests, and then we'll have a conversation with him about what he's doing. And then, of course, we've got a number of other things that are going on as well. So, Don, glad to have you here with us. You are part of Mission Eurasia, and some people might not be familiar with that, but it's my understanding that is a Christian relief effort that is going on in a number of places around the world that are under war kind of environments and all along those lines. So, Don, if you'll just share a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with what Mission Eurasia is doing. I did see that y'all are in some serious hotbed areas, because I did know that apparently you spent some time in Ukraine, but you're in Ukraine, Armenia, and now in the Israel area as well. So those are definitely some of the hotbed areas, as you just heard me talk about on the news earlier today as well. But definitely, how did you get involved, and what is the kind of idea behind this Christian relief effort?
Well, Mark, good morning to you. Good morning to your listeners as well. And greetings from the north, from Wolverine land, where we just celebrated our national championship football team. So that's our present claim to fame. I hail from Detroit area. Mission Eurasia has been an organization that's existed. It's an organization that's existed for 30 years, and it started with the intent and desire to help provide training for young men and women to live intentional lives as believers, teaching and sharing and practical training related to Christian values and those sorts of things. But as these wars have come, the Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, Azerbaijan situation went back to the 90s, but even in 2020, of course, when the war in Ukraine started 2 years ago, and then October 7th, when the war in Israel, Gaza began, Mission Eurasia, located in all of those places. We're located in the former Soviet Union, in almost every country in the former Soviet Union, plus Israel. And just as a sidebar with that, the reason for being in Israel is because about 1 out of every 4 or 1 out of every 5 Israelis or people within Israel are Russian or Ukrainian speaking with heritage and background from those areas. When we saw the needs, when we saw people flowing out of Ukraine, for example, almost 2 years ago, we just could not sit still and watch that happen. Our teammates, my teammates, Mission Eurasia is actually a mostly Slavic mission organization. President is a Ukrainian himself, lives in Nashville, Tennessee. The rest of our teams in Ukraine, Ukrainians, in Moldova, Moldovans, in Central Asia, in other countries within that region, in Poland, mostly Ukrainians that we're partnering with. But when we saw those things happening, we saw those needs, we saw the people flowing out, we had to respond. And so Mission Eurasia stepped up. One of the horrible things that happened for us is our primary ministry location in the city of Irpin. And you might remember that name from early in the war. Russia occupied Irpin and Bucha. They actually occupied our building, used it as a barracks, used it to store armaments. They threw our Bibles, our New Testaments, our children's literature out of the warehouse in order to put arms in there. And when the city was liberated, that building was destroyed. But that wasn't the end of Mission Eurasia. Instead of being in one location in Ukraine, now we're actually located in 12 different locations, partnering with the church throughout the country to provide aid, assistance, trauma care, spiritual care, counseling, you name it, to the Ukrainian people and for the Ukrainian people. And it's not just Mission Eurasia, as I was saying, it's actually the church that is doing this work. And it's really amazing to see how the church has stepped up and responded. The church in Ukraine is one of the most trusted institutions today, and it's amazing to see how people seek out the church. Some people evacuated, left the country, and churches are being filled back up again because people are seeking spiritual help. People are seeking encouragement. So in the last 2 years, if you just want to focus on Ukraine, we've been able to distribute nearly 300,000 food boxes. Now, these food boxes can provide aid for a family of 4 or 5 for about a week. We've also deployed numerous, we call them Bread of Life bakeries. So these are bakeries that are being sent to different locations, getting set up, and can bake about 1,000 loaves of bread per day. We have mobile kitchens that are being taken around. We have mobile clinics. We're working in partnership with a Christian medical association in Ukraine and sending these trucks that we are actually helping to set up medical clinics, mobile clinics, to hotbed areas, even on the front lines, providing for them medical care. We pray with people. We encourage people. We provide literature for people. These are just a few of the very, very numerous things that Mission Eurasia is involved with. For me personally, I know we don't have a ton of time, but for me personally, we lived in Ukraine for 8 years. We lived in the capital of Kyiv. And when the war first started, my wife and I wanted to be involved. We talked to the pastor of that church in Kyiv on a daily basis. We wanted to be involved, and we had the open door to come and serve, not in Ukraine, but in Poland, where we were able to serve and help over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees and continue to do that work today. So just to give you some context.
No, a couple of things were crossing my mind as you were talking and everything. I do know that there have been other areas that have needed relief as well and everything. And even in Ukraine, I do remember some of the African nations that were dealing with trying to get back to their homeland and everything. Some of the students that were definitely trying to find out what to do and everything. So I do know that one of the things that happens even in the United States, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, is some people will ask, why individuals and even missionaries will want to go to a war-torn area when there are so much things that need to be done, even in our own country and everything. So I was wondering if you could maybe speak to that and give some of the reasons that Mission Eurasia is so interested in helping in that area when there is definitely even homelessness here in the United States and other places as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there's needs everywhere. Mark, you know that. My wife and I have been involved in refugee work right here in Detroit. Detroit has one of the largest Muslim populations outside of the Middle East, and a lot of refugees, a lot of immigrants, and we have personally served and helped here. But we lived over in that region of the world. We learned the language. We understand the culture. We fell in love with the people. And when we saw the people suffering, we just could not stand by. Now, I'm speaking personally, but also as a mission organization. When you see someone in need, you give them a cup of water. And Jesus even says that. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me a cool cup of water. Whatever you do to the least of these, you do it unto me. And so we saw those needs in Ukraine and surrounding Armenia, Israel, and we wanted to respond to that. And I'm really thankful that there are those that are responding to needs here in the United States. And I say, go for that and continue pressing forward with that as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that the organization has been around for 30 years, and of course, there have been a number of conflicts, and including conflicts in Europe even during that time. So what were some of the early conflicts that were going on that y'all were involved in? Because definitely Ukraine is a fairly new conflict in the sense of being going on now about 3 years or something like that. And of course, Israel and the Palestinian situation is less than 6 months old and everything in that space. And Armenia has been there for a number of years as well. But I'm thinking with a 30-year history that y'all, like the Red Cross, have been involved with a number of conflicts throughout that 30-year history. So if you can just share a little bit about the history and some of the other conflicts that y'all have been given relief aid to.
Sure. And again, to be clear, Mark, Mission Eurasia was not started as a humanitarian organization. So we started actually training young people, training young believers in living with Christian values and living intentionally for God. That's our bread and butter. That's our focus. But that training has always included practical outreach, practical ministry. So when we're in Central Asia, for example, we're involved in training people there, but then people provide then those students, those Central Asians in the case of Central Asia, take their training, their practical training, and then we provide aid, we provide food, we provide resources that are necessary, and they travel and go to different areas that are in need. So maybe just people in poverty. So it might not be a conflict per se, but people who are struggling to find the food that they need, or people who are struggling with emotional situations, so we can bring some trauma care and things of that nature. So it's not always related to a conflict or a war or those kinds of things.
Just along those same lines and everything, as you can see, we've got the rest of the panelists. I'm sure they've got some questions as well and everything. But there has been a lot of conversation. We've even had some of our regular panelists that talk about the Christian values here in the United States and whether we are not seeing enough of those Christian values being put out in the United States in general. So I just wonder your thoughts around that and whether that is something, because there's always been this notion of separation of church and state, but whether that is something that we need to have more of, is more of these Christian values kind of put out there in the public and all along those lines.
When I think about Christian values, I think about my own personal walk and my own faith. Waking up in the morning and spending time in God's word to try to grow as to how I can be a gentle person, how I can be someone who listens, how I can be someone who loves my neighbor as myself. Those are the kinds of things. So when I think about those kinds of things, I think about it on an individual basis. I don't think about it so much on a government, on those kinds of levels. Each individual growing as a Christian and trying to live the life that Jesus modeled to us and showed us in his word.
Yeah, just along those same lines, and then I'll open up to the panel. I've also seen we've got Clem with us as well, who's on one of your cohorts there with Mission Eurasia and all along those lines. But definitely one of the things that I was curious about is you mentioned definitely celebrating the Michigan victory and definitely go Wolverines and all along those lines. I went to school in Milwaukee and I'm a proud Marquette Golden Eagle. And when I was there, we were the Warriors and all along those lines. But how do you find it easy to navigate that? Because as you just mentioned earlier, Detroit and Michigan has a very strong Muslim community. We do know that there are some activists, including some activist politicians that are from that area and all along those lines. I think the representative of Detroit or that part of Detroit is a Muslim that has been in somewhat hot water sometimes for her political beliefs and everything, and is considered a member of the squad and all along those lines. But how do you navigate that, being a very strong Christian faith, but also being in an area that has a heavy Muslim community?
Well, like I said before, my wife and I, off and on for the last, really 15 years, as we've lived in Detroit area, we've been involved trying to help Muslim immigrants in any way possible. I was tutoring a young guy, a young Kurd who was needing help with his English in high school. We were involved in teaching English to those that were desiring to get jobs, those desiring and working towards citizenship. We provided different events, Christmas events, or just bringing people together for encouragement, for to hear good stories. Went and visited the mosque myself on a number of occasions with some of my friends from Dearborn. Just trying to build friendships and relationships, build those bridges, and through that to show them the love of Jesus. That's my desire, and that's the way I do that.
Yeah, one of the things I know that has happened here in North Carolina, I'd love to hear if it's happening in Michigan, and even when you go to these countries, is there have been efforts to have a conversation among the different religious backgrounds and everything. I know that even here in Durham, there have been some conversations that have been taking place where there would be imams as well as Christian leaders as well as Jewish leaders that would get together and find a common bond for whatever the problem is that is going on. And I was wondering if y'all were seeing similar type efforts there in Detroit where people of different faiths might be trying to find a common cause on each other. I do know a lot of work around the Christian community, but many religions is around missionary work and all in that space. But are you finding efforts to do some common conversation, even if you are different faiths?
I can't speak too much to that, to be honest with you. But I can say that on a personal level, not a mission level, not an our organization level of any sort like that, but on a personal level, having conversations with the imam, building a connection, trying to understand what they believe, understand what they speak, understand how they view the world around them, how they view politics. Those are very, very helpful things. It always is a good thing to be able to sit down with someone, to listen to their point of view, to hear their heart, and that includes an imam or anyone else, to hear where they're at, and to try to relate and understand them. And in such a way, we can start to build connections. We can start to open up dialogues on various topics, on all the different topics that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, Clem, if you just wanted to chime in, because I know you're part of Mission Eurasia as well, but if you just wanted to tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and then I'll open it up to questions that folks may have as well. But I just wanted you to get a chance to speak your thoughts and your things as well. But if you'll share a little bit about your involvement with Mission Eurasia, and then we'll open it up to other people that are on the panel that might have questions for the both of you.
Sure. Mark, thanks. Thanks for having Mission Eurasia on. Thanks for having Don on to talk about the amazing work they do. So I work to help promote Mission Eurasia, to get the word out to American media, American Christian media about Mission Eurasia, to let them know about the amazing things they're doing, which is what connected the two of us, Mark, because you responded to an email I sent out to you about the fact that they're serving in war-torn areas. And, I've been honored to work with Mission Eurasia. Don talks about Sergey Rakuba, who's the president, and just everybody that I've interacted with. They're amazing people. This is a Christian organization. They love Jesus. They want to help people know Jesus as their Savior and Lord, and they're not shy about that. But they also know, as Don's already pointed out, that they're about meeting practical needs in Ukraine. They've done everything from trauma counseling. Don was running camps for kids that they don't know where their dads are at. They're not sure if they're going to see their fathers again. They were doing the food, providing food. They were providing housing, and the amazing thing is they've done such a great job at helping young believers in Ukraine, for instance, understand who they are and what their life ought to be about for Christ. That even while people, they were running for help and getting help and on the move themselves as displaced people in Ukraine, they were trying to find ways to meet needs. And I just, they are courageous, and they are focused in the right way on the things that really matter, and that's the things of God. So, yeah. So thank you. Thanks for just giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about that.
No
Yep,
problem at
Mark,
all. I'm
if I
going to
could,
open it up to other folks now and everything. I think that Rick's got his hands up and got a question. And by the way, since we're going to actually, I've got to take this point of privilege and everything to actually give a congratulations to one of our members of our panel, because I understand that Travis, who is also coming down from Australia, like Shaquille, is now a new dad. So definitely want to give you a shout out and everything, because I understand you and your wife are now expecting a new young one. So I definitely had to give you that shout out before we get to the questions as well.
Yeah, so 15 weeks along. Don't know if it's a boy or a girl yet, but super excited. Already tired from all the tests and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully in about 2-3 weeks, we'll be able to tell you if it's a boy or a girl. So
sounds good and everything.
Excited. Super excited.
Yeah.
Right. So this is an angry and divided time in the U.S., and the Russian government is happy to exacerbate that division by spreading propaganda via social media. In Ukraine, what is the Russian propaganda situation? And also, have you managed to talk to like any Russian prisoners to see what their idea of the war is?
Yeah, the last question I don't have an answer for you on, but the reality of this war is it is the Ukrainian people against that propaganda machine, if you could put it that way. When Ukraine protested in 2004, the Orange Revolution, it was against autocracy, the Russian Soviet mindset, if you want to put it that way, against corruption, yes, and that was the part of the old guard. So people were protesting against that, and then the Revolution of Dignity that then took place in 2014, and you saw people coming out in droves again against that kind of autocracy and authoritarianism and a desire towards more freedom and Western values and Western openness, Western freedom. Because under Russia, it's not. In Russia, as you've already basically pointed out there, Rick, is that the country itself, media is closed down. It's one machine. It's one propaganda engine that's moving forward. In America, we talk about propaganda on the news, yes, but the reality is that we've got different sides that can speak to different issues. There, that's not the case at all. There, when you got people running, you got the president running for re-election, and others have tried to put in an application to run against him. They found 100 reasons in the application why it was false, and they couldn't put that person forward. So the church is being, in great droves in Russia, being persecuted and thwarted, and even in the occupied territories and Crimea. Just before the war began, the European Evangelical Alliance said that the most persecuted part of the church in all of Europe was in the occupied territories of Ukraine, which is in contrast to Ukraine itself, which has been an open, free society for those things. So I don't know if that answers all your question, Rick, but it's really a front. This war is very much an ideological front between the old guard Soviet-style autocracy and Western freedoms, independence, and so forth.
Sasha's got a question for you, but before I get to Sasha's question, Lee Newton Rhodes actually put a comment in. I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, because when I mentioned separation of church and state, he said that separation of church and state is a misunderstanding, because it is not having a church-sponsored religion and not having a religious test. So I was wondering your thoughts around that, because that is a conversation that we hear quite a bit on politics, is this notion of separation of church and state. And then I'm going to go to Sasha and to Shaquille as well. But
hello, my name is Sasha Star. I'm from Ukraine, beautiful city of Odessa, and I live in Canada for the last 40 some years. Now, I would like to find out what's your opinion on the origins of this war, the invasion of Russia against Ukraine. So it was done under false pretense that Russia wanted to prevent Ukraine to join NATO and probably European Union as well, but primarily NATO. So Ukraine, obviously on its own, could never fight such a strong adversary as Russia. It was impossible even to think about it. Yet Ukraine was encouraged by the West, primarily NATO countries, Western Europe, and United States, that they would be able to help Ukraine to stand on its own. And that help was quite vital for the last, until probably 6 months ago or so. Now that help is drying up and probably will, under certain scenarios, will cease to exist, or it will be renewed in some kind of shape, form, or whatever. That alone will cost Ukraine, if you compare this, what's happening right now, and what was happening right before Russian invasion, hundreds of thousands lives, ruined economy, destroyed cities, horrible atrocities everywhere, including Bucha, Irpin, and many others.
Yep.
Do you feel that West and United States particularly have some responsibility of what's happening right now with Ukraine?
Well, you had a lot in there just now. When I think of the early days of the war and think about how the Ukrainian people stood up against the initial invasion, I don't know if you remember, there was not a lot of aid that came in that first month.
Yes,
the Ukrainians were doing it on their own, and that's actually the reason why the West began to get involved. They offered, we've heard this so many times. Biden offered Zelensky a ride, assuming that Kyiv was going to fall in 3 or 4 days, and Zelensky said no, and the people said no. They refused to be under the Russian yoke. So I think that this truly, I've already talked about this. This is a battle, a fight for freedom, for openness, for free society, for liberty, all of those kinds of things. I really believe that to be the case. And if we let Putin in his autocracy, in all of the atrocities that he has carried out, if we let those things continue, I think that it's going to impact the global balance of power, and it's going to impact relations and situations related to China, related to Israel, related to the Middle East. I personally believe that we should stand strongly behind Ukraine, and we should help them to be able to finish this war and to push Russia out of their country. I really don't see there being any options to those things. It's my take.
We just discussed it yesterday. I have a Ukrainian show here on Pod TV on Tuesdays and Fridays. And yesterday we had a very interesting discussion about the positional war, what's now happening between Russia and Ukraine. And it's a war of attrition. And the war of attrition could be won by one of two factors. Factor number one is that the will of one of the combatants will be broken. So far, it's not happening neither with Russian, neither with Ukrainian will. Their both remain the same. So the second way how you can win the war of attrition, if you can overproduce your enemy, if you can produce several more, if not produce or get supply from your friends or wherever, it doesn't matter, but you have to get overproduction of the weapons. And if that's not happening, and the first one is not happening, you cannot win the war of attrition. So what's the key in your understanding to prevail in this situation?
I don't think I have much of an answer for you on that. I'd rather hear your opinion on that than mine. My focus has been on helping the Ukrainian people, and I have political opinions, but the Ukrainian people are suffering. Millions of people in Poland and Europe, in somewhere between a third to a half of Ukraine displaced, and trying to come alongside of them and help them in this situation has been my focus. So I don't really have an answer for that particular question.
I don't understand why Ukrainians don't get a very simple message. This is a war equal to Second World War, except that it's even much worse because a Russian aggression is completely unprecedented with all the atrocities.
Agreed.
And I don't see how Ukrainians getting organized the way, for example, Israel is getting organized. Israel called 300,000 people in armies, they got 360. There's complete unity behind the present government, although most people in Israel probably hate Netanyahu. But right now, during the war, he is the leader and everyone is behind the leader. Once the war will be over, it will be different stories. There will be accountability and many other things. And I don't think it's Ukraine. I have many friends in Ukraine, in Kyiv. They are going out to restaurants, they're enjoying the good times and so on. I don't see the war-like situation where everybody is united, everybody is working on for a victory. And you, since you're spending, in my opinion, a lot of time in Ukraine, you should probably encourage people to get together, unite. Remember Second World War, how it was won? Ukraine has to do the same thing now. Just talking and say that, okay, we are going to fight, but let's get Russia out of Ukraine. That's not going to help a lot.
So my time is focused in Poland, working with refugees there. Just so you know, I haven't been in Ukraine a lot myself. Our organization is heavily in Ukraine, but I was there in May of this past year. And I met with literally hundreds of Ukrainians that are working at those 12 hubs that I talked about at the very beginning of the program, 12 different locations from which we're doing our assistance and aid and so forth. And I heard a very, very strong, unified desire, at least from these evangelical church believers, saying, we want this war to end and we are going to do everything possible to stand against it. And even those that were involved in the humanitarian response are saying this is our way of being involved in fighting in that war. Now what you're saying is true, though. Now that we're coming on 2 years, it's actually getting more and more tiresome. So in Israel, you've got 3 months, 4 months, I guess we are now, of war. In Ukraine, it's 2 years. There was a lot more unity and positive thinking that the war was going to end by the end of 2023 or something like that. The Ukrainian people were very hopeful, but now they see this as the war of attrition, and there's a lot more discouragement among the population. I will do everything I can to keep encouraging them, and that's part of my job, is to encourage the Ukrainian people to stand firm and to trust in God.
Mark, if I could jump in real quick, I apologize for interrupting, but
no, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer, Mission Eurasia, Don, the organization that he works for, they need help. They are on the ground. They are boots on the ground. They are working with the people. They are talking with the people. They're pointing to people towards Christ. And for people that want to support their efforts, here's a way you can get directly involved. MissionEurasia.org, O-R-G. They are doing amazing things. They build stoves. Russia was attacking the power grid. What did Mission Eurasia do? They built stoves to get to people so they would have a place to cook meals and stay warm during the Ukrainian winter, which, as you probably well know, Sasha, get pretty cold. So they were just doing practical things like that to keep the people. Morale is huge in a war. And Mission Eurasia, obviously, the biggest thing for morale is know Christ, know that there's a purpose to your life beyond this life. But they were doing things like the building of stoves and giving of stoves to people and giving them food and like he said, setting up bakeries. So MissionEurasia.org. Thank you, Mark, for putting that on the screen. Really appreciate that.
No problem at all.
I appreciate that too.
Along those same lines and everything, what are y'all doing in these various countries to help those that are refugees? I know that, Don, you mentioned earlier some of the efforts. I know that there are a number of Palestinian refugees that are now displaced by that war and everything. But what specifically are you doing for folks that are displaced? Or what is the organization doing for folks that are displaced?
So in Israel, we are partnered directly with an organization called Living Israel, and it's a church Christian organization, and they have been mobilizing to help the Israeli and Palestinian people there by providing shelter, by providing locations where people can stay, by providing food when necessary. I think, sorry if I get this statistic wrong, but I think it's somewhere between 60 and 80,000 displaced peoples in Israel as a result of the attacks, especially that took place on October 7th. So trying to provide there more a location at the different church locations where they meet, they're housing refugees and housing displaced people in Israel. If you go over to Armenia, between 120 to 130,000 refugees have poured out of Nagorno-Karabakh. And when the Azerbaijani people kind of put the clamp down, I think it was September 19th of this year, they basically have emptied out those cities. It's ethnic cleansing that is taking place in Azerbaijan of the Armenian people. And Mission Eurasia is in Armenia helping those refugees that have come out of Nagorno-Karabakh. And again, they're connected to churches, but we provide food, we provide counseling, we provide spiritual assistance. At Christmas time, we were handing out Christmas gifts to children, not just general Christmas gifts. We wanted to give them words of encouragement, give them a children's Bible, spend time with their families. So we would visit them in their homes and try to encourage people in those ways, providing food packages there like the ones we're doing in Ukraine. Cost about $50 to prepare a package for a family of 4 or 5 for about a week. And so those are the kinds of things that we're involved with specifically in Armenia and Israel as well.
Did you have any thoughts around what Lee had mentioned, and some other folks, including Jacoby, may have some questions as well, but did you have any thoughts around Lee's notion of separation of church and state being actually maybe a misnomer? Because what we're really talking about in his mind is not having a state-sponsored religion and no religious test. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, Don, as our guest for today.
Well, I would agree with that idea. It's not about a total separation that nothing that is religious can be talked about in the public forum or in the government spheres and so forth. It's about having a state-sponsored religion. That's what it is about. So I basically just agree with that sentiment. This idea that we need to shut down everything that is Christian and the government has to have no involvement whatsoever in any religious connections. I don't see that in the Constitution. I don't think that's what our founders originally intended when they used those words.
Yeah, definitely. Jacoby, you've been listening. Any questions or any thoughts that you've got? And same with Travis, but I'll go to you first, Jacoby, and maybe Don has some thoughts as well. But definitely, Jacoby.
First off, I truly want to applaud Don and you, Clem, for putting in the work. I mean, that's something that is necessary and I think is overlooked in our society today, that the work is needed. And we get so tied up in the weeds of arguing about, you can't do this because, or you shouldn't do this because, or we can't help because. No, the work is there. We need to help. I mean, instead of focusing so much on these insignificant issues, as Don, I think you pointed out earlier, instead of arguing about one thing, these people are hurting. They need help. Yeah. So I guess that leads me to my question of, how, for both you and Clem, how can we push back against those that want to get into the weeds and argue about, one, politics, or two, hey, it's not, you aren't the same culture as me. How can we push back against that and focus on the humanity of the situations that are going on where these individuals need help? What is a good way that you both would suggest in terms of pushing back against those things?
I personally think that sharing stories of real people, real life, that is a powerful way to do that. Clem made some comments earlier about camps. This past summer, Mission Eurasia was able to help through our hubs in Ukraine, through our work in Moldova and Poland. We were able to help 20,000 Ukrainian kids and teens go to camp and be a part of their camps. We helped run those camps. So one of the stories that pops up to my mind right away is here we are in Poland. We have a young girl, I think she's about 12 years old. She was at camp with us. The last night at camp, we were informed that her father had died on the front while we're here at camp, and that her mom's going to meet her, and they're going to travel into Ukraine for her father's funeral after we get back from camp tomorrow morning, the next morning. And just this young gal, she came to life at camp, and here she was looking at the Bible with us, playing games, doing sports, doing hikes through the woods. We were having a great time with this young gal, and then her life is turned completely upside down. Ukrainian kids, their lives are turned upside down. I mean, the refugees in Poland, the statistic is somewhere about 90% of the refugees that are in Poland. Well, first of all, adults would be women, 90%. And of all refugees in Poland, 50% or more are children. So you've got women and children who are suffering and struggling. Their dads are on the front line, or their dads are in Ukraine, not allowed to leave the country because of martial law. And so these horrible situations. We came back with this young gal to the church, and the pastor was standing there with her mom, and she knew something was up. We hadn't told her, obviously, and the pastor sat down with her and her mom. They talked for a long time. They prayed together. She's come back to Poland, and we have been able to continue to support her through trauma care. So you talk about the weeds. We start talking about the politics. We hear the stories of something Zelensky did or didn't do, and we get all tied into that. No, we shouldn't help Ukraine because of this or this or this. The reality is the Ukrainian people are still suffering greatly. And we need to continue to help the Ukrainian people, regardless of what the politics are. Completely regardless of all of that, we have to help the Ukrainian people. Children, the vast majority, have been traumatized in that country, and it's going to take generations to recover from that. We've got to come alongside of each individual kid, each family, and support them and encourage them, and bring the gospel of Jesus is what I strive to do with those kids and with those families.
Shaquille, I saw your hand, Rick, but I wanted to open it up to other folks as well. So Shaquille, definitely Dr. Worthington, as well as Travis, any thoughts or questions that y'all have also? And if not, then I'll defer to Rick. But I just wanted to open it up to the three that haven't spoken yet as of yet.
I'm happy to let Shaq go first. Age before beauty. I'm actually older, so that makes it funny. So I'll have a crack at this one. So I find it strange when people say we got to ignore the politics on this and just go for the humanitarian aid and all that sort of stuff. It's like they're delusional about what actually sets the rules in the society that we live in. So the reason NATO is able to go defend Ukraine, the reason that anything is allowed to happen is purely by politics. It sets the rules on the way you live your life. So it comes down to how much welfare you can give, what jobs you can do, where you can live, where you can build your houses, what school your kids can go to. So I find it, I won't say frustrating, but a little bit disbelief when we have people who turn around and say, oh, we have to ignore the politics, because you can't. And it doesn't matter if you're trying to do a religious thing like these guys from Eurasia are doing. And by the way, guys, I think you guys are doing an absolutely stellar job. The thing that a lot of people lose track of in a lot of these wars, especially the politicians, is because they have to look at this as what's best for the country as a whole, and they lose track in the sight of the actual civilians on the ground who are doing it tough. Like, I don't think our generations, especially in Western countries, have ever actually dealt with what it's like to be on the front lines in a war zone. So a friend of mine is Dr. Natalia Nan, who's an Australian dentist. She's actually born in Ukraine. And she got into a lot of trouble because she broke quarantine in Australia to emergency dental surgery for a 12-year-old kid. So she got jailed for 12 months. And she reckons she's got more freedom on the front lines in Ukraine during the war than what she actually had in Australia during COVID lockdowns. And that blows me away. And talking to her, she was saying like how bad it is and how the civilians, like especially women, are getting raped on the front lines. And she was saying it's not just the Russian soldiers doing the raping as well. It's both sides. It's an absolute lawless zone now at the moment. So I'd love there to be a lot more political pressure, not just from Western countries as well, but I think also a lot of Eastern European countries need to step up as well. I think a lot more countries need to turn around and say, right, these people are in immediate danger. We need to open our borders to them. We need to actually shelter these people, and we need to have a plan back. So once the conflict does finish, a lot of people forget about the refugees at that point. There's no help for them to try and get their lives back, because a lot of the people who do flee the countries during war or famine and all those other things, they still love their country of birth. They want to go back, but they can't because there's no homes there for them. There's no jobs for them. There's no economy left over. So I think that not only they have to deal with their immediate needs, but it's also the follow-up after the conflicts are over. And I think that's where a lot of politicians fail.
Travis, your right-wing side of politics, which is joined by Dan Worthington, did I just hear you say that we should open the borders to let these people in?
Because they're in immediate risk. They're not economical refugees.
But yet your right-wing side of politics complains about the Middle Eastern people that have been displaced, like from people from Syria and other countries, Iraq, etc., flooding Europe and flooding Australia and flooding the United States with Muslim immigrants that aren't going to integrate. So
but there's a big difference on that one, Shaq, because the ones like, for example, let's use the war in Israel and Palestine. So if let's say someone's fleeing Palestine, they're fleeing for their life. Once they say get into Jordan, are they still fleeing for their life? No, they're not. So they're going as, oh, great, you know what? We're out of danger. Let's go find the best country to settle in. So then they jump to Australia because they become economic refugees.
With due respect, that's not the argument that you just made, right?
Yes, it is.
You don't say to the Syrian refugees you should hang out in Jordan, right? You don't want them in Europe. You don't want them in Australia. You don't want them in the United States. And now you're saying that Eastern European refugees should be able to flood into Western countries. What I will say, because I
said refugees should be able to way back home.
What I will say to Don and to Clem, who I'm sure don't want to get involved in the political food fight that is this show. If we just set politics aside for a moment, I think what you guys are doing is great. I very much respect the non-secular or the non-denominational way in which you're dealing with things, and I think I have a great respect for what you're doing in Detroit, where you mentioned dealing with Muslims. I think people are just people, and it's very unfortunate that what the governments of countries do is unfortunately a reflection of the people, and unfairly so, because many people don't agree with what their government leaders do, especially in countries where there's a lot more conflict and a lot more corruption. So anything you guys can do to bring some humanity and some grace to people and some dignity to people, I think is fantastic. And I'll certainly be supporting your organisation. So God bless, and I hope that you guys are able to make those differences that you want to make.
Amen.
Just really quickly, this is for Don really quickly, because it was some of the conversation in the chat and everything. And we know with both the history of Red Cross and I imagine even with your organization, what safeguards do you put in to make sure that the money that people are donating is actually getting to the causes that people want to give it to? Because that is one of the things that people sometimes get frustrated by, is humanitarian aid that doesn't necessarily get to the humanitarian effort. So what kind of safeguards are there to make sure that it is actually given to the people that it is supposed to be helping?
Well, that's a great question. We have We have outside auditors that are constantly looking at what we are doing and where our money is flowing to and so forth. In Ukraine, the aid goes in, it goes to these hubs, and we watch where it's going. We don't just send money in and the money gets just generally distributed to whoever, quote, needs it. The monies are used in the ways that they were intended. If someone sent $50 to purchase one box of the aid, then that money goes to purchase that aid and get it distributed and delivered to the location where it needs to go for the aid. We have different people looking in from different sides. We work very, very hard at that. As a matter of fact, we've had organizations in the last 2 years that have come to us and say, I could mention some and they'd be familiar, but I won't do that. I don't want to say something I didn't ask them if I could. Larger organizations that have come to us and said, we want to partner with Mission Eurasia. And one of the biggest reasons is because they see our transparency, they see the integrity of the work that we and our partners and our teams on the ground are involved in doing. And they see that we're doing it with a godly character. And so those things combined, they say, partner with us. We want to help you. We want to provide for you so that you can do the work that you're doing. So those are some of the ways that we are assuring transparency and integrity.
I'm just going to slightly change the topic on something that was actually quite an important topic, but Mark mentioned the Maldives in his open, yes. And the share screen that I had up was actually put up when you mentioned that. So that's why it's still up there. So this is my last trip to the Maldives, and I was fortunate enough to meet with, to have the First Lady and one of the government ministers on the plane with me. So this is my last trip to the Maldives. So it's gone off the screen. This is my last trip to the Maldives last year. Beautiful part of the world, and look, India has a lot of things that they tend to argue about with other countries. I am theoretically Indian, but I would just say that we should not take sides in some of their arguments. So that's a couple of photos from my trip in the Maldives. I would highly recommend that people go and visit the Maldives if they can, and other countries. The people that work there, it's an expensive place to go, but the people that work there tend not to actually earn that much.
Shaq, the Prime Minister of the Maldives, has been on our show before. I don't know if you know that.
So that's me out the front of it. And,
I did have a question for Clem and Don. And Rick, I think Rick may appreciate this question as well, because this is something that he and I are both passionate about. In terms of future, looking into the future of how you guys are providing not only the aid and everything that you're doing, how can future technologies affect and work with you on that? Like AI being that future tech that's there and pressing on, will that have an effect on what you're doing and how you're able to provide or designate or find other areas of need in our global society?
You mean to find other places where Mission Eurasia would step in to do work and assistance and so forth?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I have an answer for your specific AI technology question related to that, because Mission Eurasia, the way we do our work is, again, what I've mentioned is we come on we're involved in training, in discipleship, in bringing biblical training to places, and then a crisis erupts, and we step in and try to find ways that we can help, meaning we have the resources to help, and what's most needed. Maybe I should put those in reverse order. When there were protests in Kazakhstan, you may remember, just before the war in Ukraine broke out, we looked at that situation and tried to see how can we help there. When the Afghans were pouring out of Afghanistan, they were pouring into, dare I say, our region, into Eurasia, into Tajikistan specifically. And we looked at different ways with our partners on the ground that we can assist the Afghan refugees that were coming out there. So it's more where our people are on the ground already. doing the work that they initially were called to do, and we say, hey, can we come alongside and help you in this present crisis, in this present situation? So it doesn't answer your question about AI, and I apologize for that.
No. That was a good answer. I mean, yeah, it's
Rick
just
had a question as well, and then I've got a lighthearted question to ask. And we could go a few minutes over and everything, but Rick had a question, and I've got a lighthearted question to ask you, Don.
For decades, people inside and outside of Ukraine have been trying to squeeze corruption out of the government because a clean government is better able to resist Russia. So this is for Sasha, for Don, for Clem. How's the government now, and how is it working with the government?
Why is a clean government better able to resist Russia?
Well, because the old Ukrainian government was infiltrated by Russians, and they were,
it was the crux,
and they're not infiltrated by the West. We know that America, for example, has spent countless billions. When I say America, I mean all of us, Australia.
Well, in America, there's an argument. Some conservatives are saying that, well, how do we know that the money going to Ukraine isn't being taken by corruption? And everybody else is saying, no, the money mostly goes to U.S. arms manufacturers.
My favorite U.S. president in modern history being Ronald Reagan. Are we not going to say that there was some sort of influence there as a result of money being spent in certain places?
Before we go down that road, in terms of Rick's question, actually, I am rather curious. Is the government prior to Zelensky, was it easier to work with, or was the government now easier to work with? Because I think,
if I can finish my question now. So Rick, what makes it that a clean government is going to be better able to stand up to Russia? I mean, most governments around the world, including those governments in the West, are influenced by money and power exerted on them from more powerful countries.
Look, all I know is like that the World Bank and that the EU and a bunch of people in America, including Republican senators, were complaining about like this corrupt prosecutor Shokin, and that's all tied up in this like Hunter Biden stuff. But I'm guessing that the government, that the war at the very least has made for clean, focused government.
Well,
I'm just asking, is that the case?
Let's leave aside for a moment US politics, and let's just address a couple of things here. We know that the Western interference in other countries has caused an enormous amount of problems in the past. We also know that we've been told for a couple of decades that the Ukraine is an extremely corrupt place. What we have seen is people in the Ukraine suffering terrible human tragedy, and the West saying to Russia, don't do it or else. And Russia's going, or else what? Well, what if we just go in and annex Crimea? And what did the West do? Absolutely nothing. Then they've gone in and tried to take over Kiev. They've totally infringed on the sovereignty of the Ukraine. And the West's response is, well, we told you not to do it or else, but now that you've done it, well, we'll kind of give some money and do, but we won't put any of our boots on the ground. So my statement is, and I've said this before, I've said this to Sasha before, we in the West have threatened to do something. Our bluff has been called, and we haven't actually done anything. And in the meantime, there are millions and millions of Ukrainians that have left Ukraine who may never return. The Ukraine, regardless of what result there is, whether the Ukraine wins this, whether it's a stalemate, whether Russia gets some ground, whatever the result is, the Ukraine, in my opinion, is left weaker and poorer because of the mass exodus of Ukrainians. And that is a failure of the West. If we're not prepared to go in and actually stand up for what we say we believe in, then we should just say that. If we are prepared to stand up for what we believe in, then we should actually back it. We haven't done that. And I think the Ukraine has been much worse off as a result. And it's not just the United States. Sorry, Sasha, I'll just say one last thing. It's not just the United States. Nigel Farage, who is, described as being an extreme right-wing nutjob, okay, Nigel Farage talked about this 15 years ago. He talked about this in the European Union. So I actually hold Europe and the European Union far more responsible for this conflict than I do the United States. I think that our response to it has been terrible. And I think that the Ukrainians that have been misplaced and displaced as a result should have a pretty poor view of the West, in whom they trusted to protect them, in whom they tried to have closer relations with and were let down. That's my opinion.
I'd like to, I'd like to clarify the situation for our people. Russia proved that for whatever wrongful reasons it appears to be, pretends that Ukraine will not be able to join NATO and so on. However, regardless how wrong this idea is, Russia proved that it is prepared to kill people and get their own people killed in order to protect their so-called reasons for starting the war. However, I must say is that in the West, in the United States, people have their lives, their careers, their mortgages, their families, and none of that is applicable to Russia. They don't own anything. They're all slaves of Putin, and they are prepared to just go and die because they will die anyway. As Putin openly said, you will die anyway, you from alcoholism or from car accidents or whatever. So you might as well die for your fatherland. Go ahead and just keep dying.
Sasha, one of the things that I think is so sad, when you and I first started talking and started to get to know each other 4 or 5 years ago, we were looking at some of the Russian music and the Russian army band. And I remember saying to you, I wish that we had that sort of patriotism in our country. I think that the West has let itself down, and I think we've become so much weaker. I don't agree with what Russia's doing, but I'm not in the right position to really comment because I'm not an expert in that area, as you hear me say all the time. But ultimately, if we're going to judge this by our standards here in the West, I think we've done a terrible job. And not just in Russia and the Ukraine, because that's what's in the media at the moment, but look at what we've done in Africa. Look what we've done all over the world. I think it's an awful position. Before you go to Toby Clem, what's up?
I just wanted to ask the question that was prior, because that's what I was really curious about in terms of dealing with the government entities that end up switching, and because I think that was what Rick was going with, the changeover from one government to the other. Has there been, from Zelensky jumping in to someone else prior to, and you've dealt with that in other countries and other areas that you've that you guys have been to? Is there what challenges do you find when that takes place, and what challenges have you come up against when dealing with with powers that change from one government individual to another?
You mean how Mission Eurasia is partnering and working with the government entities and so forth?
Yes.
Well, to be honest with you, our work is more grass levels. So we're working in these 12 hubs around the country, and we're working with church entities and church partnerships and religious organizations, or it's a Mission Eurasia hub in its own right. It's fully a Mission Eurasia organized entity. So we're not as closely connected to government entities in our work. We're not that big organization like a Red Cross that does contact the government and says, we want to come in and we want to help and we're going to do this and can you help us do this? We're working on that grassroots level. And as I think I mentioned earlier, I mean, the church itself in Ukraine has become the most trusted entity. If you take a large entity, the surveys have been made, it's the most trusted entity in the country. And so we're working with them. Now, I will add one thing for the corruption and all of those issues. Those are massive problems. Those are remnants of the Soviet state, and they are still ingrained in portions of society. But they are getting less and less and less. I am seeing accountability today that I did not see and experience when I lived there in the late 90s and 2000s. Back then, the corruption, it was right in front of your face. If you wanted to get your car registered, you had to pay somebody to do it. And I'm not talking about the fee. It's an additional fee. You couldn't do it. And so, like, after the protests, especially in 2014, they fired the entire police force in Ukraine. And what did they do? They rehired, retrained, and paid them well enough so that corruption at the police level decreased exponentially. That was part of the problem. I get pulled over. The police officer doesn't get paid enough. So in order to either give me a ticket or let me go, I just give him a little bit. Or I pay my so-called fine, but he doesn't give me a receipt. Well, we all know what that means.
Don, I have a great deal of respect for what you're standing for, but to be fair, in Florida during the 80s, the police department employed a whole heap of new recruits, and the entire academy class in the 80s got fired for corruption because they were helping the drug cartels traffic cocaine. So I acknowledge your point that there's these issues in the Ukraine, but these issues are also in our own societies, right?
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
We saw that
and all I can say to that, I mean, I don't want to look cynically at everything. I've seen anecdotally and heard many times that, for example, with the police situation, it's gotten much, much better than it was up until that what I described took place. That's the people on the street, people on the ground, people in the church that say we don't want this corruption to be taking place, and we're seeing less of it. It's still there, though. You'll still find it, but as you said, Shaq, it's in Florida, it's in Michigan, and it's in our.
So I guess my question to you, Don, would be: how do you go about talking to people in the West? Because not everybody's on the side of the Ukraine, not everybody's on the side of Israel, for example. How do you go about navigating this when what we talk about in the West and what we consider to be corruption in the West is vastly different to what you see in other countries? How do you bridge that gap and actually explain to people? The example I just used is not actually an accurate example. I was being slightly facetious. How do you overcome that and actually explain to people, look, this is what's actually happening over there, and it's vastly different to what we're used to experiencing in the West?
What I often try to do to talk about those two issues or talk about that topic is to try to paint comparisons. A lot of people look at Russia and they'll start thinking to themselves, Russia is just another version of the United States. I think people think that way. They look at different countries around the world and they go, it's just like us. They think just like us and all of that kind of stuff. And I try to paint the picture of a very corrupt state, a state with no freedoms, no freedom of the press, no freedom of within politics and political realms, oppression left and right. I've been in Russia. I was in Russia 2 months before the war started, 3 months. And I have an open Russian visa right now. But even with everything I'm saying right now, you won't find me going into Russia anytime soon. So I try and paint that picture about the oppression of the church in eastern Ukraine and in Crimea. Try to paint the picture of the atrocities that Russia is doing, and then move over to Ukraine and say Ukraine has been striving to be a different country. Somebody mentioned earlier that the atrocities on the ground are identical 1-to-1. Ukraine and Russia. That's not what I'm seeing or hearing. That's not what my teammates. I have chaplains that are with Mission Eurasia. They were partners with Mission Eurasia. Now they're chaplains in the military. That's not the kind of thing they're seeing. We're seeing Russian prisoners be sent back into Russia from Ukraine. And when they come back into Ukraine, they want to surrender again. And Ukraine is providing cards so that they know who to phone call when they get put back on the line.
Sasha has his hand up. This is a question of both you and Sasha.
All I'm trying to say is just trying to make those types of comparisons. And I'm going to need to go pretty quickly here.
No, before we get ready to end the show, but Sasha, you have something, and I have that lighthearted question for you, Don.
Something very important when you people are talking about Ukraine, corruption and any other problems, you don't understand that Ukraine is very complicated society, and there are three distinct things when you're talking about Ukraine. Number one, it's heroic Ukrainian army, second to none.
Yep.
Fact. Number two is a government. Government is responsible for corruption, for many things that frustrate a lot of people, including the West. And Zelensky was given a list by United States, what has to be done in next year and a half. And point by point by point, everything was spelled out there. Number 2 document was immediate removal of 13 top people from the government. Number 1, Mr. Yermak has to go. Well, he hasn't gone yet. He's still there. So number 3, we are talking about Ukrainian people who are not responsible for the government and what they're doing. They live their best day-to-day life. Some of them are working or studying or preparing to go to the front lines or moved to Poland, but maybe some other countries or so on. And these people have to be helped any way you can help them. That's all I want to say.
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
Well said.
Hey, just
Well
really
said.
quickly, Don, just as I said, I was going to have a lighthearted question for you. So this is my lighthearted question. You mentioned that national championship that the Michigan Wolverines won and everything. And I do know for a fact that there is another Detroit team that is in the playoffs. So I want to know from you, will the Detroit Lions win a Super Bowl this year? Because the Detroit Lions are actually in the playoffs and all along those lines. So as a devout Detroit and a Michigan person, is your Lions going to win the Super Bowl?
Well, I don't know if you'll understand this, everyone in this call, but Decker did report in Dallas.
He did.
Don, on behalf of everybody who's on this network, I certainly hope you'll be back. I'm sure that Sasha would love to have you on his Ukrainian show. But God bless, and I hope that you're able to achieve the things that you're trying to achieve over there. I think that organizations like yours do a great deal of good that most of us can only envy. So God bless and wish you the best.
Thank you, Shaq. And Caleb mentioned it. We've mentioned it before. We really could use people's help. So missioneurasia.org, and you can find out right there. It's pretty simple how you can help so that we can do the work that God has called us to do.
We run a break.
Appreciate all of you.
But we run a sort of a sister network to Pod TV in Australia. We've linked up. I'll actually make mention of you to our Australian audience, and I might even invite you onto our show as well. So, but again, God bless, and I hope that you were able to achieve the great things that you're trying to achieve over there.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Shaq.
Dom, if you got any last messages, if you want to answer my question as to whether the Lions will win or not, and then we'll get ready to get on out of here.
Will they go all the way to the Super Bowl? I have my doubts, but I'd love to see them win a couple. Go to the NFC Championship. That would be something to really see. For me personally, I'm actually leaving for Poland next Wednesday, so I'll only get to see the playoff game this weekend, and then I'll be gone for up until I'll be back before the Super Bowl, but I'll be gone for a number of weeks.
Understood. You had something you were going to add to Toby? Otherwise, I'm going to hit the exit button.
I was just going to make a joke because I was going to say I hope they get vengeance on Dallas because they were robbed.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, there was some questionable calls.
Very quick question, Dan. Do you speak Polish or Russian or Ukrainian?
I speak Russian, and I understand and can have basic conversation in Ukrainian. You probably understand what I mean when I say that. I don't speak.
I'm
glad you. I'm glad you.
Поэтому ты русскоязычный, наверное, да?
I can speak.
I'm glad you do, John, because the only thing Sasha taught me how to do was how to swear in Russian when I met him. So that's the only thing I've remembered.
And on that note, we're going to get on out of here, but this has been a fun conversation. I'm glad that I was able to reach out through Clem to you, Don, and I think that we definitely gave some great insights, and I hope that you can make a return trip after your trip to Poland and share some more insights and thoughts, but I was glad to reach out to you through Clem and have your insights on what's going on. And I am a big fan of humanitarian aid whenever we can do that, no matter what the situations are. So I definitely have a great deal of respect for what you are doing and look forward to hearing more of your great work. And we'll try to find ways to show my support as well. So definitely have
Thanks,
a
Mark.
great deal of respect for you.
Dan, have you
Thanks,
heard
Mark. Thanks, everyone.
this saying, "Еще Польska не сгниела"?
Uh-huh.
You heard that? Yeah. Okay, when you're in Poland, remember this.
Yeah.
And good luck.
All right.